15-year-old Marty was savagely attacked as she cycled along this footpath yesterday afternoon. Her fully clothed body was found in a copse.
Alison's body was found by police frogmen making another search of the canal.
This year, so far, the two men have attacked 12 times right across the Greater London area.
Police have one clue. They know he has a minority blood group after their forensic scientists found traces of his blood on one of his victims.
And it was a case of simply working through that list. They just went through them one by one.
It's a massive task. It's a massive task and laborious.
In the early 1980s, I was requested if I'd like to join something called the Heart Inquiry, which I found out was a series of rapes that had been happening in the Hampstead area.
It's the biggest operation of its kind. Police have positively linked 23 attacks. They work together, usually in the evenings or in the night time.
What you would find was there were two men involved, and one was noticeably taller than the other. The taller man was the more dominant and barked some orders around. You could see there was an element of planning involved. I think once that the murders started, you knew that the people who'd been committing these rapes needed more gratification than they were getting from the rapes themselves. Until they were caught, more people were going to die. The people who'd committed these had to be found ASAP. The first day I arrived there, I was given a briefing by the senior investigating officer, and it always sticks in my mind. He did say to me, it's a matter of time because we've got a blood grouping and it's A secreta, PGM, 1+, 1-, and we're going to work on a list of people and we're going to narrow it down till we get to who we need to get to. There were thousands out there. There were thousands of people that would fit that.
We'd drawn together a profile of offenders who were either rapists, had sexual offences against them, and we would then visit every one of those and try to ascertain their movements on the days of the various murders and rapes. So that's how we identified the 3,000 plus that we were going to interview. And these were called the Z-men. The difficulty was we didn't have a particular order in which we could actually address these because we didn't know who the suspect was.
What does your list look like? There's 1,000 dangerous people. How do you prioritise your dangerousness?
Don't forget, we were in a pre-mobile phone, pre-digital age, okay, pre-ANPR, pre-DNA.
This is very basic material, I think, that was coming. It was like, this is Joe Bloggs. He's committed a sexual offence in the past. This is where he lives. Knock on the door, and there's 50 to go and see. And people would knock on doors, eliminate, knock on doors, eliminate.
They just went through them one by one. And number 1,594 on that list was an unemployed carpenter from Kilburn who had a charge against him for a serious assault on his wife. And his name was John Francis Duffy.
John Duffy was in there, so he would get people going round to try and knock on the door, have a quick chat, take a swab, have a chat with him, talk about his movements, and either eliminate or implicate in some way. John Duffy was evasive. Whenever anybody went to try and interview him, he would find a way of never being in. At the time, though, there were so many people on the list, they would just move on to another person. There were so many people to be seen. He was just one of a number of people. There's a real pressure to catch them, but also there's a sense of optimism in some way that someone with that blood grouping will be caught at some stage, but how many people suffer in the meantime?
With any offence where the perpetrator is a serial offender, there's always the thought of, where is this person going to strike next?
She was just a joy to be with. She was a lot of fun, but she was also very, very straight. You know, she would do the right thing, and she was terribly loyal. We knew that Anne wanted to get married, and unfortunately her father had died and her mother. And she came back to my house one day and she said, "I want to ask your dad if he'll give me away." Of course, he was absolutely thrilled to be able to give her away. And it was just a happy time, and she'd got the man she wanted. They went on honeymoon, and then it was probably a week after that, if that, she went missing.
In 1986, I was the detective inspector at Welling and Hatfield, and it was on the 19th of May that I was on duty. A young lady's gone missing. She'd recently been married. They'd been back a week from honeymoon and had taken the train down to London to go to work. She left the office at 8:30 p.m. Her husband, Lawrence, got home and she wasn't there. So Lawrence drove straight down to Brookman's Park railway station. He watched the train come in, and Anne didn't get off that train.
Her usual route home would have been a 10-minute walk to Waterloo Station to catch 2 tube trains connecting with the main line from King's Cross. She was due to arrive at her local station, Brookman's Park, between 9 and 11 p.m.
Brookman's Park railway station is in the commuter belt, and during times of commuters, it's very busy. But after 8 o'clock at night, it becomes a very desolate place. 2 men have been seen in the vicinity.
You've got a young woman, stable background. Everything around her disappearance was ringing alarm bells. Something sinister has happened to her. She's been taken.
I knew something was very wrong because she'd phoned her nan to say, "I'm leaving now," at about 7 or 8 or something in the evening, but she didn't turn up. It was not Anne to not let people know where she was. Particularly the loyalty she had to her nan. If she knew she was coming home, she was coming home. Nobody went to bed or anything. We just spent the night driving around looking for her. Very worrying.
So you've got a third young woman in a space of 8 months disappearing close to a railway station, all within a 25-mile radius of London. Is this the third murder in this sequence? The one that we've almost been expecting? We have now got a serial killer on our hands. But unlike the 2 previous cases, there was no body. Where was she?
So we started searching. Brookman's Park is the last frontier from Hertfordshire into the Met, and so we decided we'd choose the Metropolitan Police borders to search to.
There were 5 teams of 6 officers and a sergeant and an inspector on each team. 12-hour shifts. They usually start at about 8 in the morning till 8 at night, and we had to search this entire area completely. So we had to cut through the whole thing. All these bushes had to be trimmed right back with the machetes we had. And the temperature was really hot, dust everywhere. It was very hard work, yeah. And when you look at the size of it, it's quite a daunting task. But we did, and we did the one behind that and the one behind that. I have no idea, I can't even begin to feel what Mr. Locke was going through, worrying about his wife just vanishing like that. It must have been awful. You know, your loved one goes to work and they suddenly just disappear. And the stress he must have been going through must have been awful.
If Anne herself is managing to watch, what would you say to her?
Please, let us know that you're all right. And if you can't, just hang on. You know, we're looking for you. We are going to find you. There's no doubt about that. And I love you. I want you to come home soon.
My brain's saying, well, where is she? Because we were literally working towards the borders with the Metropolitan Police and we still haven't found her.
We did 6.5 weeks of searching. The chance of her being alive after a passage of time was very, very slim. When she didn't turn up from work, well, I said to one of the DIs, if she was on the back of the train and got off, was taken up the track, people getting off the train would look forward. You very rarely look behind you when you get off a train. And that's in fact what happened. She came along this path here, over the road bridge, and up into the undergrowth the other side, where she was murdered.
The discovery of Anne Locke's body on a railway embankment has left detectives convinced they're hunting for one man who's killed 3 women and raped at least 3 others. Mrs. Locke's body was badly decomposed, but it was clear she had been suffocated and tied up. According to police, there were sufficient similarities in the way she died to link her murder with 2 others.
I think we were told the body had been found first and then a little while later that it was Anne. I just walked down the garden and just sat at the bottom of the garden, just numb, really. Just shattering.
Due to a major error in planning the search, there was a breakdown in communication between the Hertfordshire Police and the Metropolitan Police. Both thought each other was going to cover this 200-metre section of embankment and it didn't get searched, and that was that crucial short distance. That's where a gang of railway plate layers noticed something, and they checked into the undergrowth, and sure enough there was a woman's body, and it was Anne Locke. That 9-week delay had huge consequences in the outcome of the investigation.
At that point of actually finding the body, my heart dropped, because I'm thinking, why didn't we find her, and why didn't we find her earlier? Imagine how far forward we would have been if we'd have found Anne's body within a week. The body had deteriorated significantly, that any chances of recovery of any samples was reduced to nil.
When Anne Locke was discovered, I got a phone call and I was invited to be present at the scene and the post-mortem examination.
So you went to the Anne Locke?
I did. If she'd been found sooner, we would have every chance of getting the trace evidence as well, which we needed. Well, Anne Locke's body was in a very decomposed state. She'd been dead for some time. The clothing was more or less falling off her because underneath was mostly skeletonized. You could still see that there was a ligature, although obviously it wasn't tight around her neck, because her neck, there's no soft tissue left. She had something which looked like a sock, which appeared to have been placed in her mouth. And it was quite obvious that it wasn't natural causes. The hands were tied, so everything pointed to something like a ligature strangulation.
At this point, with the discovery of Anne Locke's body, we started to move into, this is a serial killer. This is a person who's hunting women around railway stations. Within hours, all of our investigation had moved with feed-ins from both Surrey, the Marty Tamboza case, and East London, the Alison Day case. And the whole thing was joined together in what was probably the biggest coordinated investigation since the Ripper.
When it got to suspect 1594, John Francis Duffy, 2 officers visited his house. He wasn't in, left a note saying, please can you ring police station? And he never did, and they left several notes, got nowhere. And eventually it was arranged for him to come in and be interviewed, and he was the first suspect to come in with a solicitor. And he was also the first one to refuse blood samples.
I was at the office on one morning, and 2 of the astute detectives came in and said, Governor, we saw this guy last night, we didn't like him one bit. He was very, very evasive. He's got these laser-like eyes, which was something that had been brought up when we've interviewed the victims of the rapes, that one of the rapists had got these particularly piercing eyes. His name was John Duffy. So we went straight in to see the superintendent, and it was agreed that they would make some inquiries surrounding John Duffy. He'd attacked before. That's how we had his ACE secretor sample.
Duffy's behaviour was definitely something that made us, as a team, very suspicious. I was also aware that John Duffy had turned up at Hampstead at some stage, saying he'd been attacked and lost his memory.
So the officer rang me and saying, you won't believe this, but last night, after we'd interviewed him, the same man, John Duffy, goes into the police station and says he's been attacked. He's been slashed across the chest with a sharp instrument. He's been punched. He says that he's lost his memory. They took him to his home address. He didn't recognise his mum or dad or the dog. And basically, he's now in Free and Barnet Hospital in mental care.
course, they go to Fry and Barnett, find he can't be spoken to, he's been sectioned. They just have to play a waiting game. By now, Duffy is becoming a stronger and stronger suspect all the time, but he can't be got at because he's in a mental hospital at this point, which is exactly what he was wanting.
Well, I was thinking we need to interview him, and we can't. And as far as I was concerned, he was a good suspect. John Duffy has got a question mark to him, but we've still got another lot of Z men to get through, and we're still going to continue in that investigation. We always had suspicions there were two people involved in the murders and the rapes.
The police had a whole series of rapes that were now being linked to a series of murders. There was huge pressure on them to stop this, to find who was doing it. And so the police at that time were prepared to look at stuff that maybe was only in the experimental stage, but it was worth a try. Let's give it a try, you know? What's to lose? Police were very interested in psychological profiling at this time. It was at the really at the kind of inception of this idea that criminal psychologists could look at the facts behind a series of crimes and make some accurate predictions about the nature, the character, the psychology of the person involved in it.
From the study of the behaviour of criminals, and to build a sort of mathematics around that will allow us to give some hint of the most likely area or series of areas in which an individual may be living.
David Kent was probably the first criminal profiler in the UK. He provided a physical description. He suggested that the rapists were probably loners, that they'd been involved in low-level crime as youngsters and had progressed, and that possibly had a working connection to the railway stations.
This is a man who'll probably have a troubled marriage. He said this is a man who'll probably be a bit narcissistic. He'll be very interested in physical culture, bodybuilding, martial arts. Essentially, he's going to be a fairly small man. You know, he likes to dominate women. It helped them build up a picture of the kind of person that they might be looking for. And it did turn out to be uncannily accurate in the case of John Duffy.
Police can't reach Duffy at the moment, but they've got an interesting suspect here. So the first thing naturally is to try and build up as much information as they can about him. Very quickly, he becomes a more and more interesting suspect. His job as a carpenter for British Rail entitles him to free travel on the rail network. Suddenly, this is a bit of a connection. Secondly, Duffy's hobby, his obsession, is martial arts. That's where the tourniquet connection actually came from. The police found that for the dates of the attacks, and particularly for the murders, they were either unaccounted for or they were annual leave days from his work or days when he was certified sick. So suddenly, this becomes a very, very interesting suspect indeed.
He was in hospital and there was nothing we could do about it. And we were challenged by that, but what can you do? If a doctor says you can't interview him, you can't interview him. But what we didn't know was that he was actually being released, like on day release. And it transpired on one afternoon, he raped a 14-year-old girl beside a railway line. And again, the victim described his laser eyes, and his description was identical to John Duffy. He then properly fell into the suspect list, and Surrey police provided surveillance on John Duffy.
The surveillance operation on Duffy goes on for about 3 weeks. Gradually during that time, he begins to twig that he's under surveillance, and because of his knowledge of the rail network, he basically makes various attempts to lose himself, either on the tube or on the train. At one point, he even jumps off a train while it's in motion. This is a man who's becoming more and more desperate and more unstable. By now, he wasn't working anymore. He was watching violent pornography. Relationships with almost everybody around him had broken down. His relationship with the ex-wife had become completely wild and unstable. He was also guilty of a violent offence against her new partner. finally the team pick him up again, back by the railway line adjoining where the previous attack had taken place. It's late on a Sunday night, and it becomes pretty clear that he's there to attack a woman. And so the decision was made then to swoop and arrest him.
The man was arrested after one of the biggest operations ever mounted by police. Thousands of people have been questioned. All the killings happened near railway lines or stations.
We went to interview him. His whole demeanour was, "You're not going to get me." He would talk to us glibly about martial arts, but all the questions we put to him, he would answer no comment. So it is an arduous interview. He didn't give us anything.
Although no charges have yet been brought, the man was this morning taken from Guildford Police Station to court. Behind closed doors, magistrates granted detectives an extra 36 hours in which to question their suspect. If needs be, police can apply for a further 24 hours before bringing charges or releasing him.
When I interviewed him, he just couldn't look at me. Could not look at me. He displayed a lot of facets of somebody who's guilty, but knew they couldn't break their story. I wasn't there. I don't remember anything because I can't remember any further back than yesterday. I don't remember because I've had amnesia. I've told the story, I'm sticking by it. I'm never going to change. You prove it. It's very frustrating for an investigator.
He was living with his parents sometimes, so a search of that and his flat in Kilburn is conducted. Searching those two properties starts to yield powerful information here. So they find at his flat endless martial arts textbooks, the anarchist cookbook, books with diagrams about tourniquets, how to overpower victims and so on, violent pornography. And at his parents' house, they find a length of string. It's a strange paper-based string, which when it's analysed turns out to be something called somyon. This particular ball of string is an unusual ball of string because it's made of what they call an end string, which is when the string is coming off a loom, either end is going to be at slightly irregular lengths to the other bits. So therefore, it's a unique ball of string. And when it's checked forensically, it matches exactly to the ball of string which was used to tie up Marty Tamboza. It's come from the same ball of string. So it's another piece of evidence which makes them realise that this has got to be the man.
Having met him, having read all the statements, gathered the evidence, presented a case ready for interview, I was convinced he was quite capable of a murder and those rapes. He was put on identity parades where he was picked out, and then based on the evidence, he was charged with the Alison Day, the Marty Tamboza murder, and the murder of Anne Locke.
Duffy used his knowledge of London's rail system to shrewdly plan his rapes and murders. He's accused of starting a 2.5-year trail of attacks. In December 1985, it's alleged that Duffy moved further out to Hackney Wick and turned from rapist to murderer.
There was always something in the back of my head, and many detectives, that John Duffy didn't act alone on the murders, and we knew he didn't act alone on the rapes. In the rape statements, there were two men. There's always something that worried me about Marty Tamboza's murder, and the man running up to a train that was described didn't look like Duffy. And there was also something that disturbed me about the disappearance and murder of Anne Locke, when there was a witness that said they'd seen two men tugging at the sleeves of a woman.
The next thing to do is to look at his known associates, and the only person who is screaming out as his associate is the person who was at school with him, did martial arts training with him, went jogging with him, and had committed petty crime with him since they were children, David Mulcahy.
Duffy and Mulcahy went to school together. They grew up together and they were both bullied at school, which drew them together in a stronger bond. We know that they were committing offences as youngsters, as teenagers. They also tortured a hedgehog, beating it to death with a plank. We also know they were firing air guns at victims in the street, and they were planning burglaries.
So David Mulcahy is brought in for questioning, and it's a very, very different experience this time. Unlike Duffy, Mulcahy has got plenty to say, but none of it committal. He's arrogant, he's cocky, he's very cocksure. You can ask me anything.
He denied any involvement. He said that he hadn't been out with Duffy for a long time. We, as a result of interviewing John Duffy's wife, know that David Mulcahy was still in contact with him. They would go out together. You think there is definitely two people involved in these offences. There was a man seen on the bridge on the night of Anne's disappearance. A man who had quite a long face, long hair and a high forehead. A taller man than the first, something that we thought was significant. We do know from the rapes that one of them was particularly more violent than the other. And in fact, the violence seemed to be more indicative of his attacks than the sexual elements, or that he was aroused by the violence.
We always fancied Mulcahy as the second person. But what do you do with no evidence? No confession? Nothing.
Basically, we put up on an ID parade with those witnesses that we thought might be able to pick him out, and he wasn't. He wasn't picked out. I was angry because, having analysed all the evidence, he displayed a lot of facets of somebody who's guilty. But John Duffy wasn't saying anything. There wasn't enough evidence upon which to charge David Mulcahy. So the case went ahead against John Duffy.
We couldn't have a funeral for a little while because they had to keep her for a while. We did finally get one. It was the people who had been to her wedding were at the funeral, and it was at the same church, and the same vicar. 3 months before, he'd stood there and married them. And now here we are at a funeral. And that is just hard for everyone to deal with.
I was pleased that we'd identified Duffy. We could prove the Alison Day case because there were samples of fibre on Alison Day's body, even though she'd been in the river, that related to Duffy, and also because of the somyarn in relation to Marty Tamboza. But I was still a bit bereft that because of the deterioration of the body, there wasn't sufficient evidence against Anne Locke, although the full evidence was being sort of joined together of the 3 murders to support the Anne Locke case. I was always concerned that it would be insufficient. I can't ever deny that.
Prosecution counsel Tony Hooper QC has just started outlining details of the killings to the jury. He started with the case of Alison Day. He said she was strangled with her own clothing.
trial of John Duffy in January 1988 was aided greatly by a couple of key witnesses. One of them was Duffy's ex-wife, who came forward and presented to the court the catalogue of crimes against her during her marriage, and how the marriage had actually been a journey from Duffy being, in her words, a nice person to becoming a complete maniac and a sadist. The other key witness was Duffy's friend, who he had used to beat him up and slash his chest with a knife, and then he would claim he had amnesia and didn't remember anything. That destroyed Duffy's amnesia alibi.
Mr. Hooper said that Duffy had set the assault up and his claim of memory loss was a sham. He said Duffy was a cold, calculated man who knew what he was doing.
I was at the Old Bailey when John Duffy went on trial. You know, he was quite measured. When he was asked any questions, he was almost timid. Only a handful of his rape victims, and maybe only 4 or 5, give evidence. It would have been an ordeal.
There was tremendous bravery shown. I can't even begin to imagine how traumatic that would be for them.
Lawrence Locke, Anne Locke's husband, was accompanied to court by his father. In fact, one of the police officers told his father to probably wait outside, not go into the gallery, because the evidence was going to be disturbing.
In the witness box today, her widower was asked by defence counsel David Farrington if he was given rather a hard time by police. Mr. Locke replied, "In my opinion, yes." Later, Mr. Justice Farquharson intervened to say he had been passed a message saying Mr. Locke's father had collapsed outside the courtroom. Mr. Locke, who slammed down his statements and dashed out, pale and distressed, was given a police escort.
His father had collapsed with a heart attack in the foyer of the Old Bailey. His father was rushed to hospital but was dead on arrival. And while Lawrence Locke was away at the hospital, it was then that the judge made the decision to not continue with the Anne Locke side of the investigation.
Today, Mr. Justice Farquharson told the jury he believed there was insufficient evidence to bring in a guilty verdict in respect of Anne Locke. The judge said the prosecution claimed the manner of her death was so similar to that of the other women, it must be the same man. He said that could not be justified, and he'd be asking the jury to find Duffy not guilty of Anne's murder.
I remember being told that, and I was pretty devastated. I understood how the judicial system works. I knew because of double jeopardy that we couldn't ever charge Duffy with the murder of Anne Locke again.
I was in my car and I heard it on the radio, and I had to pull over quickly just to sort of let it sink in. That was difficult to deal with because our Anne hadn't got any justice, it felt like. I think, having to then deal with that as well, I think, on top of losing her and then the fact that it's just sort of open-ended is very difficult.
This morning he sent them out to consider verdicts on 13 counts. He said the brutal and callous killings of 19-year-old Alison Day and 15-year-old Marty Tamboza were bound to provoke strong reaction, but the jury had to approach the cases coldly and clinically.
At the end of the trial, John Duffy was found guilty of a number of rapes. The judge said he had never seen one man brought before him charged with so many rapes and murders. He was found guilty of the murder of Alison Day. He was found guilty of the murder of Marty Tamboza, but he was found not guilty on the murder of Anne Locke.
I do remember there being some quite low-key mutterings of approval from the public gallery, but I don't remember him reacting. I sort of got the impression that I thought there was almost an acceptance by him of his situation, and I think that he knew that this was the end of the road and in many respects the end of his life.
Normally with a trial like this, resulting in guilty verdicts after a huge amount of work, there would be a sense of satisfaction of case closed. Unfortunately, on this occasion, the case wasn't closed. It was very frustrating because Ever since the murders have been connected with the North London rapes, the police knew that they were looking for another man. He was still out there. So for those victims and for those police officers, this case was still very much unfinished business.
There are some cases that never leave you, and this is a case that doesn't ever leave you. Every May the 18th, I've thought about Anne Locke's disappearance. When you draw the circumstances of the 3 murders together, the one thing that jumps out of you more than anything is there are 2 people involved. Well, who's the second person? It does pose that question to you as an investigator. Which one is the actual murderer? Are they both murderers?